So, at the European Fan Fest, there was a press question and answer session, like there always is, and at that press segment, Naoki Yoshida was asked a very interesting question. It pertained to the new player experience and whether there will be changes to fasten or alter it, considering just how long it can take a newcomer to make their way through all of the expansions up until level 100 and the end of Dawntrail, where they will at last be ready to ingest new content. Or I suppose digest is a better word there, but whatever. He replied too, and I want to read a couple of snippets of that reply to you now to open up today's conversation. We are considering two things to address this. The first one is something that we will carry out at or before Evercold's release timing. The second one involves the system, but we are currently reviewing the possibility of this. So right now, we are still considering its feasibility and addressing the question about whether or not we would be able to introduce the system. I do appreciate that back at the time of A Realm Reborn, I had previously said that I do want players to enjoy the story, so I would like them to have a fresh experience right from A Realm Reborn. But now that we're at this point, we have begun thinking about accommodating these kinds of requests. And I think from the two things that I've hinted at here, one of them at least you might be able to know more about at the Tokyo Fan Fest. I am thinking very positively about the possibility of incorporating something and accommodating these requests. So, he's obviously talking about allowing players to either skip through the story as a new player, or to expedite their process through it. So, that's a bit of a bombshell, no? For so many years, whenever the idea is broached of FF14's story being quite off-putting to certain subsets of players, many say that something like this will never happen, and that you will play the story as intended, as it is a story game. Yoshida has a fairly set stance on the subject, and he always has. And yet, now it's clear, he doesn't. Change seemingly is coming, and it's coming soon. But this subject is pretty nuanced, and I think it is worth discussing. Should Final Fantasy XIV allow new players to zoom through the story in a faster manner to catch up to endgame, or should they have to work through in the way they do right now with no other option? Is there a middle ground? And how would that middle ground work? Let's discuss all of that and more. As a quick aside before we properly jump in, if you want to support deep dives and discussions about FF14, please do consider subscribing. Now, to make this clear, before we properly get into the conversation, I know this is going to be controversial. People feel fairly strongly, and I would argue emotionally, on either side of the fence as to whether people should have to play through the story or not. So I suppose I want to make a quick disclaimer to keep things nice and respectful in the comment section. There's the housekeeping. Now, to talk about why people would want some kind of expedited progression in the first place. I can certainly understand this sentiment decently well, and so I want to present it to you. I've been playing FF14 for near enough 12 years now, right? It's my favourite game, ever. I have gotten hours and hours of enjoyment from it. I've made fantastic friends, and I've experienced core memories through progressing and clearing raids with them. It is fair to say that FF14 has made an impact on my life that I'll never forget in a positive way. Yet, I skipped the story for the longest time, and only recently have I been taking the time to slowly and carefully go through it and experience it all. I've been enjoying that greatly too, to make it clear, and I can see why people love the story. I'm sure by the time I get to the end, I'll love it too. But my enjoyment and fulfillment in this MMO is not predicated on the story whatsoever. I can live without it, and still feel like my time in Eorzea has been worthwhile. On that count, I know I'm not alone. But why? Firstly, FF14's main scenario is, at this point, very, very long and constantly growing. Every couple of years we get a new expansion, and that time mounts up so very quickly. To give a bit of context, just watching cutscenes from the start of A Realm Reborn up until the end of 7.0 Dawntrail will set you back in the region of 130 hours. Not dungeons, not exploring, not dialogue that doesn't enter cutscene, nothing else, just cutscenes. And if you don't believe me, this guy made a Google Doc categorizing every single cutscene in the game and how long it took, so I have the numbers to back it up. Many people cite the number that it'll take you about 300 hours to get through FF14's story on a first playthrough, but if I'm being honest, I think that's a low roll if you aren't rushing, and that number is constantly going up. At this point it has to be 400 or 500 hours. Don't get me wrong, having this wealth of content to make your way through is a good thing. It shows the game has so much to offer, and if you're engaged in it and enjoying the journey, you are getting your money's worth, or in the case of many, your free trial's worth. It's a blessing. But this can also be bad, because, and I hate to use this argument, people have a limited amount of time in their day. Often, you might only have time to play for an hour or so after work in the evening before needing to log off, and that means that different types of people have different motivations for how they spend that hour and why they play in the first place. MMORPGs, more than anything, are all about player choice, about choosing how that hour gets invested, about being able to do anything with it. They are about existing within a world, making your own goals and finding your own fulfillment, be that through social connections, raiding, questing, crafting, role-playing, or finding something else to do that brings you enjoyment. Choice is at the forefront. There isn't and shouldn't be only one right way to play or one correct path to tread in the game. Each person should get to choose it for themselves and not feel severely impeded for making that decision or judged. The story is important for sure, but that isn't the be-all and end-all. MMOs are social experiences too. People don't always sign up alone. They'll register with their friends to play through the game together, or to catch up with their buddies who are already at endgame and get involved in whatever group antics they have planned. The story can be a great experience that can be made social, but I feel that it isn't inherently social, and it isn't the social experience people are expecting when they hear MMORPG. That's something FF14 has uniquely, and it comes with boons, but some people really are just looking for either a gaming comfort food or a new snack with their friends, and they don't want such high barriers to entry, and that experience is valid as well. The story experience and the endgame experience and everything in between are two different things, and they aren't really representative of one another. I do personally find that FF14 can be difficult to recommend to friends for that reason. I'll tell them it's a really fun game with a great story and so much content, and then I'll share my good experiences when it comes to raiding or meeting people. But there will, inevitably, at one point, always come an unfortunate turn in the conversation where they'll ask if they can get involved in those raids or those things too. And I'll have to say, well, yes, but probably not for 3 to 6 months until you're caught up. I'll offer to do things with them as they unlock them, to help them along, to spend time with them regardless, but it doesn't really do much to help with the feeling that they are being left out of the fun. They're an outsider until they're caught up. It's an understandable feeling, really. That's not to say that a new player should immediately be hopping into endgame raiding with 0 barriers, but there has to be some middle ground between immediately doing that and what is likely a 500 plus hour journey to get there, and that solution should be baked into the system. The 3 arguments that I often hear against there being some kind of skipping mechanism through the game are as follows. MSQ is the majority of the game and also the quote-unquote best bit. Story skippers will be bad at the game. And thirdly, that the people that would skip aren't, quote-unquote, the right type of people that we want in our community, which I have to say in quotes, because personally I think it's an absolutely wild statement to make. To me, stating or implying that FF14's MSQ is the only worthwhile reason to play the game has the byproduct of stating that you don't have much confidence in what else it does. That's a shame, because so much of this game is really, really good. Best-in-class raid design, a massive and varied back catalogue of instanced dungeons and raids and trials and content that offers hundreds of hours of fun, great housing and character customization options, and a world full of secrets to explore and interact with, crafting, gathering, instances like Eureka and Bosja. There is so much. Boiling the entire world of FF14 down to you should play the story or there's no point feels like a strange attitude that borders on exclusionary and elitist without much of a real foundation. Let people find their own reasons and love the game on their own terms, especially seeing as it doesn't affect you directly as a story enjoyer. On the matter of skill, personal experience alarm, I've seen no correlation between skipping the story and lacking skill. I've met players with 10,000 hours who love the story and they have so much playtime, and yet they are incapable of stringing together a basic 1-2-3 combo at the best of times. I've met story skippers with 150 hours of game time in total, getting through Savage and even Ultimate and absolutely pulling their weight and learning fast. I've met everybody in between. Everybody learns in different ways and has differing levels of motivation and investment in getting good at FF14, and thus the rate and depth at which they learn is, in my opinion, completely separate from whether they digest the story or not. If I'm honest, I find it a little bit silly that there are people that are genuinely convinced otherwise and think that those metrics lock in with one another. Of course, if you go through the story, you will be forced to spend time in instanced content. But oftentimes, if you are skipping the story in order to do instanced content, you're still going to do a lot of it on the way anyway. I suppose in summary of the reasons why this is a requested feature, people enjoy different experiences and digest games differently. Let them, as long as it isn't hurting somebody in the process. Surely we can find a middle ground, and that's what I'm trusting and hoping Square Enix can do. With that said, I can certainly understand some of the concerns that players have and why so many people are vehemently against the concept. Despite everything I've said, the story is a core part of the FF14 experience, one of the pillars, and absolutely one of the main reasons it has garnered so much goodwill in the public eye as well as critical and commercial success. Final Fantasy is a JRPG series primarily, and a handful of MMORPGs secondarily. And as a series, it is known for its memorable characters and heartfelt stories that stand the test of time. FF14 is no exception, and it includes all of that, and I do think it's reasonable to argue that if you don't at least give that a shot, you could well be depriving yourself on one of the seminal gaming experiences of your time. The story offers context for the battle content, it makes the stakes higher, it pushes the emotional resonance, and it certainly does enhance the experience. There is something missing if you skip it, though if you're willing to eat that loss is a choice you should be able to adequately make for yourself. I recently went to the fan festival in Berlin, right? I've been back for about a week. I don't know if this conveys the point that I would want to, but I hope to try. I spent a lot of time during that event with people who would sit on both sides of this fence. Avid storygoers who have played through everything 5 or more times, skippers, and people who lie somewhere in between. We experienced the event together, we hung out outside of the event together, and we also all sat together during the keynote at the beginning of FanFest, getting excited about what was to come in Evercold together. There was a strong sense of us and of friendship, and we were all equally excited for the experience we were having. On the Sunday evening, we went to the Primals concert together, and, pardon my French, we lost our shit when they hit us with the Howling Blade music. When Yoshida got on stage to sing Brute Abominator's theme, and at the time stop, I teared up at the emotional beats, and it was such a memorable time. There were no barriers based on where our foundations for loving FF14 had come from. We all had our own reasons, and that was fine. It was valid. All that mattered was that there was a reason, and the shared enjoyment that we had together. But what solutions could Square Enix have in mind, and what should they have in mind? The first I'm sure we're all thinking of is one that has been weighed up in the forum of public discussion before already, which is having a new starting point for the story as an option for beginners. Right now, you start the game at level 1 at A Realm Reborn, and you will progress chronologically through Heavensward, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, Endwalker, and Dawntrail, in order. It's a linear story, and you will follow it with no exceptions. An idea that has been thrown around since as early as the pre-7.0 hype was to allow players to start at the beginning of the new saga with at the time what people were saying was 7.0, and progressed through from there. It never ended up coming to fruition, but it's certainly an option Square Enix could consider. Do I think it's the right option? Honestly, not really. I think a better bet is to ease the journey rather than to remove it entirely. Another option is to extend the ability to use skip potions up to the current expansion, which would mean that when Evercold releases, players can skip up to the beginning of Evercold. If this were the solution, I could see Square Enix handing out a free skip potion per account as well, which newcomers could use with their new main, and current players could send to an alt in order to get that ready for the new expansion easily. Conceptually, I don't mind this. I mean, I'll take a free skip potion, but the issue I have is that FF14's tutorialization is still fairly poor despite the improvements it has seen over recent years. There's still a lot of work to go, and throwing new players into cutting edge without giving them at least some small buffer sounds like a dangerous combination that could result in a poor experience for them and a frustrating one for more long-term players. I think the solution I personally would like to see is an expedited progression track through the story. So, you know how things are right now. MSQ accounts for almost everything essential, and there are very distinct side quest chains. Some of those side quest chains feel quite important, like raid quests and so on, and others are less important. You can tell what kind of quest it is by the icon. MSQ, important side quest with an unlockable, side quest, and so on. This works well. What if Square Enix added an option, and it's important that it is an option, for a new player to join a fast pass track of the story. There, any quest that borders on filler, or is even just considered non-essential or has a large lead up that they can cut, all of those are shifted into a new category of quest, optional main quests. You can still access them and do them, and there would need to be some kind of in-game guide to point you towards them in the correct order, at the correct time, for those who do want to filter back onto a non-expedited path, though the goal would be to make more of the story optional. In doing this, they could be able to cut away a third or even more of each expansion, maybe half, and then suddenly you have a far more manageable story to get through as a newcomer if you want to enjoy the main part of the story, but also reach endgame in a relatively quick time, and then you can go back and fill in that additional context later. A far more hardline experiment could be to make a Realm Reborn essential, but 3.0 through to 7.0 optional, and allow players to go from level 50 to level 100 via a level skip and hop straight onto Evercold there. Again, I find this option questionable from an immersion perspective, but the argument for it is simple. Jobs are supposed to be baseline feature complete by level 50 in Evercold, meaning that players finish a Realm Reborn and then they will have had practice with a bare bones version of their completed kit already. They have an effective baseline to progress from, so it does solve that issue, although it presents new ones. I think it's hard to say just make the story optional because FF14 is at its core a story-based game, and yes, this is important and shouldn't be entirely sidelined, but surely some smart streamlining or player choice to expedite that process, as long as it's optional, will only be a good thing to include more players in the future. It seems that, regardless of whether people like it or not, it's going to happen, especially seeing as it is in pursuit of Square Enix's main current goal of introducing FF14 to more players, and making it more friendly to the kind of player that has less time, and more alluring as a source of fun for the gamer that has ever more options and ever less energy in the current busy state of the world. I think for now, I'm waiting to see what they actually do before I have too much of an opinion on it. If it's thoughtful and carefully implemented, I'm likely going to be a big fan. If it isn't, I'm sure we'll hear about it quickly because people will not be happy. More than this though, you've heard my stance, kinda. I want to hear yours as well. This is one of those subjects where everybody is going to have their set position, and whilst I do think it's a bit of a tiring conversation and people take it a bit too seriously, whenever it comes up, I always learn at least 1 or 2 points of view that I've never considered before. That's really interesting. So, I'd love to hear your personal thoughts on the matter, in the comments section. I have a feeling we're going to revisit this topic after Tokyo Fan Fest, when the mysteries have well and truly been lifted.